Hi, so today we're going to talk about resumes and using the Career Center in college. So we'd like to welcome Katie Rose. Katie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, sure. As you might have guessed by my last name, I'm Kathy's daughter. A little bit about myself. I went to college in Notre Dame, representing today for this call, and I graduated in 2013. I moved to Chicago afterwards to work for Deloitte's consulting practice, and then I went to graduate school for public policy, which is basically like government relations and management. And now I live in Washington, D.C., mostly doing economic research. So my mom asked me to talk a little bit about the Career Center at your schools and how you can prep to position yourself for great internships and jobs. So the first place that you should start as early as possible is at the Career Center. The Career Center can help you no matter where you are in your kind of career search, job search, internship process. Even if you haven't picked a major yet, you can walk in and say, I'm interested in jobs that have a lot of interaction with other people, or I really like to sit at my computer and work through things first, and then I like to talk to a team. No matter where you are, they're going to be really helpful. They also have a lot of different types of tests that have to do with like aptitude and what kind of job you might be both well suited for and interested in. And they're trained to help you take those and talk through you with the results and what they mean and what kind of opportunities they might open for you. In addition to that, they have seen lots of students walk your path before, and so they know a lot about different career options out there, what the alumni have done, what other people with your major have done, and honestly, they're going to open you up to a lot of different careers that you've probably never been exposed to before. I know 3C does a great job of trying to have different types of professionals come in and talk to you, but your Career Center can continue being a part of that in your life. So a couple of other things that the Career Center is extremely well positioned to help you do, and that you're going to have to do no matter what to get a job. First is to work on your resume. For your resume, you're going to want to have several versions of it available if you're looking in different industries. And honestly, even if you're looking within one industry, if it's within like different types of jobs. So for example, nonprofits, if you were looking for nonprofits, maybe you would want to really highlight a lot of the community service and activities that you've done on that front. Whereas if you're looking in some of the more like quantitative sides of the business sector in like consulting or banking, then you may actually need to put like your test scores on there. That was something when I was coming out of school, it was like very specific to that type of job. You needed to have your SAT scores on there. But if you had your SAT score on and you were applying for maybe a teaching job, that would be a bit, that might not be the norm in that industry. But the Career Center can help you figure out what type of resume you need and build it correctly. A couple of other things on resumes while we're on the point. So one, build a couple of them. Two, spend a lot of time talking to and sharing your resume with other people, making sure that it is conveying the absolute best version of yourself. Resumes are read for a matter of seconds usually, like people don't spend a lot of time on them. So you have one chance to try and get in as short of time and as small of space as possible, everything that makes you a perfect candidate for a job. So in my family, with my friends, with everybody, every time I've applied for a new job or for schools, I will have a resume, I will send it to them, I will have them critique like, do the words convey what I want them to? Are they all in the same tense? Did I make sure that I always was showing like outputs of exactly what I had done so that the employer didn't have to guess what my job was if they weren't familiar with the position before. And that really matters. And typos, like just have a couple of fresh eyes read it, because you're going to look at that thing so many times. You're not gonna really realize any of that anymore, but those are the little things that an employer might immediately notice and throw your resume into the no pile, all just because you could have had somebody read it for an extra like 10 seconds for you. The last thing I'll say on resumes while we're in this period, which I forgot to mention at the beginning, I'm so sorry for all of you guys that are, well, really at any stage in high school or college, that you're out of classes right now. I know that must be really tough. I know it's very tough for folks out in the working world, for me being home some days more than I expected. So what I think you can do though in this time is take a minute to figure out if there is something that you really like and that you can use to position yourself for jobs in the future. So if you are picking up extra tutoring jobs, or you're maybe you're even just like helping some of the professors in your school figure out how to do online learning better, like if you can take some initiative during this time and then capture it in your resume and then in your interviews and everything to follow, I think that's really going to make folks look like quite standout candidates. Everybody's going to have spent a lot of this time taking extra naps and catching up on Netflix that maybe they missed. But if you can show an employer that in your downtime you were able to find a way to be like thinking forward about the future, that's the kind of people that they want to employ. Okay, now that was a lot about resumes. Where we were in all of this was career centers and what they can help you with. The first thing is resumes. The second is cover letters. When you apply to a job, you're going to write, not just send your resume into the abyss, but you'll also have a letter on top of it that says who you are and why you want the job, what qualities you bring to it, what experience you have, and some things that you're really hoping to get out of the job. Cover letters are really awkward to write because you have to talk a lot about yourself without it looking like you're like overselling yourself. And I think especially for college students, it's probably one of the like hardest parts of that process. So work with your career centers. They're going to have lots of examples for you, and they'll help you read them and make sure that you're highlighting all the best experiences. Okay, so let's see. The last thing that I wanted to talk about in kind of career center specifically is that most career centers have a set of companies that they work with to hire for programs every year. And these are kind of, a lot of them are in the private sector. They're like general management, rotational programs, finance, consulting, those kinds of jobs. But most of them are basically going to have a built-in pipeline to certain companies that know them, that have a lot of alumni there. And those often recruit really early in the year. So they can be recruiting as early as August and September if your school starts in maybe September, October. But just take advantage of reaching out to your career centers now and trying to find out what the timeline for recruiting in some of those programs might be for the next year. I guarantee you that your career counselors are probably getting less traffic than normal because they probably see people in person. So if you want to reach out to them online and see kind of what you can do to prep now, maybe you work on some of the resume stuff now while things are a little bit calmer. And then you're ready to go when the semester starts again. But either way, there are a couple of really well-tread paths that are great opportunities if you know about them early enough. That being said, those programs aren't really for everybody. There are some more kind of niche jobs that they just don't hire enough people every year to have those kind of pipelines into the companies. And when you're looking for an internship or a job like that, you're gonna have to do a little bit more creative work on your own. So for that, there are 3 different things that you can do to get some of those types of jobs. And these can be everything. Think of like startups or smaller companies, that sort of thing. The first thing, I lied. There's actually one more thing that the Career Center can do, and it's this first one. So if you're on the less well-tread path, the less pipeline option, then the first thing you should do is talk to your Career Center about accessing your alumni database. Almost every Career Center is going to have a very, very well-functioning alumni database because it's how they try and get their donors for the year. But it's also there to help current students find jobs and kind of pay it forward to those students. So the alumni database is going to have all kinds of information. It's going to have usually the latest contact info, job history, and sometimes like fun facts about what the person did on campus. I think mine for my school has like that I was very involved in student government. It has what dorm I lived in, just little things. And that matters for something that I'll tell you about in just a minute. The useful thing about an alumni database is not just that all the information is there, but it's there for you to use. So what you can do is send emails to these folks. They're a little bit awkward, and that's what the Career Center is there to help you with. Of writing an email and reaching out and saying, hey, I saw your information. I think what you do is really interesting, and I would love to talk to you about it sometime. These kind of networking emails are going to open you up to what we would call informational interviews. Informational interviews are where you are just trying to talk to somebody like very casually. It's not about necessarily getting a job, but it's about finding out what they do, what their industry is like, what kinds of opportunities are even there. Because most businesses actually have much more behind them than what the end customer actually sees. And so when you do those informational interviews, you can hear a much broader set of job opportunities than you would have thought. And you might find that your place is not exactly where you had expected it would be at the beginning. So a couple of things about the informational interviews. When you send those first emails, it's helpful to personalize it to that exact person. So for example, if somebody was reaching out from my school and they reached out and said, hey, Katie, I'm really interested in a job. Would you be able to talk to me sometime? I probably wouldn't respond to that email. But if they said, hey, Katie, I also served in student government and I lived in this dorm. I'm really interested in all government issues, but particularly in foreign policy. Would you be willing to talk to me sometime? If that was the case, I would immediately respond and be like, absolutely, like those are all my favorite things. I can't wait to hear about what campus is like now and tell you a little bit about what I've done since I graduated. So take the time to write a good email, talk to your Career Center people about finding the right information, and then do a little bit of prep for that interview. Be ready to ask them a lot about what they did to get that job, what kind of skills they think are useful that you could be building now, what types of classes to take, what kinds of extracurricular activities to get involved in. And they're really going to be able to give you just a lot of help and advice on how to break into the industry you want, because the job search is hard. And they know that, and they're going to be there to help you. And they wouldn't have signed up to be a part of the database if they didn't want to. So take advantage of them because they're there and they're just waiting for you to let them know that you want their help. Okay. Another thing that you can do on campus, now we're going to broach out of the Career Center for a minute because they're great, but every once in a while, maybe you walk in and you just don't connect with the person immediately. Do not fear, you still have lots of options for finding internships and jobs. Another one that I would highly recommend, especially early in your time as a student, is to get to know some of the research centers on campus. I know a lot about the government space, so sorry, I'm going to use a lot of those examples. But at the school, so for undergraduate, we had an international relations research center and development. In graduate school, which was focused on government, we had one that was focused on cyber policy, one on business and government, one on education policy, one on local governance, one on national security. There's just a range of different research centers. And when your professors aren't teaching you class, what they're doing, what the rest of their job is research to inform these kind of broader debates in the world. And a lot of their research is funded by these centers. And they get lots of recognitions, and it kind of good research begets more money and more opportunities and the like. What they do for students though, is that they often have an extra set of money, kind of pot of money that funds research programs and internships. So find those centers on campus, find ones that are kind of attached, even if tangentially, to something that you're interested in doing. Walk in, and a couple of things that you can do. You can get to know some of the professors that are attached to that center, and you can offer to work on a project for them. Usually those are going to be paid as if they're an on-campus job, And you might find that builds your resume better and is more interesting to you than maybe, I don't know, working at the coffee shop on campus or something. It's kind of up to you on how you want to spend your time, but it's a great option if that's something that you want. You kind of want a resume filler in an area maybe that you haven't had a lot of access to or opportunity to explore before. Also check in, especially this year when a lot of places just like they aren't going to have the money to be able to hire. You may be able to get summer funding from some of those institutes. So especially if you are interested in like the nonprofit space or a little bit more public service, those spots are usually going to be able to offer you like a pretty good amount of money. My freshman year, I got to know the International Relations Research Center, and they gave me a $4,000 grant to work with a nonprofit in Central Africa. And I mean, that was amazing, right? I had to convince my parents that that was a good idea, and it wasn't exactly what they expected, but it opened up. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about the types of jobs that I would want, the kind of sector that I would want to work in. And that is like the goal of those programs. And they're always looking, they're looking for students that just, they have a good story and they want to learn and they want to embrace that experience. So like reach out to those places. The worst they can say is, no, we don't have any money available this year. But I guarantee you there's money hiding out on your campus that you probably never realized was available for undergraduates before, or to help fund unpaid internships. That's another thing, just kind of looping the last two things that I talked about together. When you're doing informational interviews with alumni, if you feel like it's been a pretty good conversation and you feel comfortable, or maybe you've talked to a few of them at this point, hopefully at every end of every informational interview, they have given you the name of somebody else to talk to as well. That was a key thing I forgot. See if they know of any organizations that are looking for some kind of either freelance or volunteer help over the summer, and then try and work with the research centers and see if they'll help fund your unpaid internship. That's a great way, especially over the next year or so when the economy is probably not going to be great, to make sure that you're able to really explore some career fields, even though they're not hiring at exactly the rates that would be more ideal. Let's see. Okay. So research centers. Look at your research centers. The very last thing that I'm going to talk about is clubs and getting involved on campus. So getting involved on campus is going to help you do 4 different things. First of all, get involved in something that makes you happy, because the other people there are also going to have similar interests to you and they're going to make you happy. So if dance is your thing, like join the dance club, you're going to meet other dancers and it's going to be a lot of fun. When you meet those new people, they become a part of your network. And that sounds kind of like, I used to hate that word. It sounds kind of like artificial. But what I think you'll learn increasingly as you go through college and your professional career after is the lines between your family and your friends and your professional network, they don't need to be separate. You know, you don't have to go to the career center for your job stuff and dance class only for friends. But really you should be able to talk to those people about how your job search is going, and if they have any friends or family members that are in industries that you've always wanted to learn more about, and use them just as any other resource. Because like if you're friends with them, they're going to want to see you succeed and they're going to want to help you out professionally as well. So don't be afraid to talk to people about what your goals are and kind of connections that you're looking to make. As long as you're doing it because you're like genuinely interested and excited to talk to those people, then that will shine through and it won't come off in that like artificial, I'm just making these friends. Like you don't want to make friends just because they have access to something, but most of the time there is going to be a convenient middle ground where like the people that you want to hang out with are also the people that you would want to work with one day, if that makes sense. Okay, So meet new people and learn about opportunities through them. The second thing is makes you a little bit more interesting of a person. If you only go through college taking the fewest credits that you can and doing okay in them, and then kind of working a job that you didn't really like to get through, then I mean, you're going to be like fine at the end of college. You're going to be able to get a job, absolutely. But if you're really focused on, getting slightly more competitive or niche jobs or something, then being a little bit more interesting person helps your resume. It gives you something to talk about in your interviews. It gives you something to connect with some of those alumni about and say like, oh, I was involved with this dance troupe on campus and I absolutely loved it. It's where I made my best friends. And they're going to tell you that, that's the exact same for them. And they just went to their friend's wedding from it and blah, blah, blah. And that's actually, it's going to open up, it's just going to make the whole process a lot easier. It's going to make it more comfortable and feel a lot less forced. And I think you're going to have, it also just makes your college experience more fun. So I see it as a win, 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 win. Okay, that was number 2. Number 3, it's going to give you experience in leadership that companies are going to look for on your resume. So for example, I'm going to stick with the dance troupe because that's what I'm on these days on the example that we've been using so far. Maybe your junior year, you become the treasurer of that group. So for universities, for all these clubs, they have a pot of money that the university's like student affairs center will have. And maybe your dance troupe gets a few $100 a year to put on some shows, rent out your dance space. And if you're the person managing that money, you're going to manage the money, you're going to plan the events, you're going to be involved in talking with and negotiating with the student affairs folks on campus and getting to know the university's bureaucracy. All of those things are going to give you such good experience to talk about during your interviews. Interviews can be stressful enough as is if you're sitting there kind of like scrounging around for examples of things in your head to talk to people about. That makes it all the worse. So lean into leadership options in your clubs. They're both rewarding to be able to give back to something that you're passionate about, and they'll give you great experiences to talk to future employers about. Okay, the last thing that getting involved on campus can do is that a lot of those clubs are directly tied towards the industry that you want to be in. Let's see, I was giving an example earlier about a friend of mine who was really interested. She always wanted to become a dentist. She was the president of the dental club on campus for 4 years or 3 years. She eventually went on to dental school, which she had the Army pay for, and is now a dentist in the Army. But in the dental club, basically they talked with all of the different big dental schools throughout the country. So she knew a lot of the admissions people by the time she was applying. She had talked to professionals in the space, and she was really comfortable with the industry. There's a lot of other clubs out there for any number of industries that you may be interested in. I know for people interested in consulting, there's almost always a consulting club on campus, and they help you practice for the interviews, and they help you meet people that are in that space. A lot of what those clubs do is bring alumni and companies back to put on programs that talk about what they do to recruit. And all of that just gives you more exposure to different types of companies, to different people, to just kind of options outside of the career center that that will help you in your search. So get to know all of those things. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention, because I forgot to mention it earlier at the Career Center, but in talking about this last thing on kind of career affinity clubs, it reminded me, is interviews. A lot of different things throughout this I've mentioned informational interviews, which are a little bit different bucket. Now we're talking about kind of interviewing for the job. There's a lot of different types of interviews out there. So use the clubs and use the Career Center to prepare for those. For example, There's three big types of interviews that come to mind for me. The first is behavioral, and this is a very standard type of interview. You're going to walk into the room, have a little bit of small chat about kind of why you're interested in the job, why you're a good fit, and then they're going to ask you a lot of questions like, tell me a time when you were working in a team and kind of something went wrong. Tell me about a team working experience. Tell me about a time when you failed. Tell me about something you're particularly proud of. You're going to get those kinds of questions. And so when I was saying earlier that you want in college to build up kind of a lot of extracurricular activities and stuff outside of just your core coursework, it's because you're going to be able to draw on a much broader range of experiences when you're in that type of interview. The second type of interview you may experience is something in the consulting world, but there are kind of similar ones in other parts of industries called a case interview. And this is one where they're going to walk you through a problem, and you're going to have to kind of reason your way through it. So a lot of times those are like business cases. They're trying to estimate how many people every year buy a new pair of glasses, or something like, I don't know. Basically, they feel like those terrible problems that you had in high school when they talk about two different trains leaving Atlanta and New York at 40 and 70 miles an hour, and you have to figure out how many cakes are being delivered in Chicago on next Tuesday or something. They're just a little bit, they stretch your mind, and they're a little bit hard if you've never done one before. And so the Career Center can help you practice for those types of interviews. And when you have an interview, you can talk to the Career Center about what type of interview they think it will be. Usually the employer will tell you, but they will probably, they'll be able to do mock interviews with you and practice. And usually my Career Center in college always told us, if at all possible, in your job search, try and line up an interview, like a real interview first, that like, if you didn't get the job, your soul wouldn't be crushed, because you need to get one to kind of get the jitters out of your system. And they get a little bit better as you go. So that's why the Career Center and mock interviews and prepping for those are really important. The third type to be aware of, just as a good reminder, maybe for studying for your finals and getting excited for your next semester, is for some industries, having mastered whatever your subject matter is really important. This comes to mind for things like engineering or economics, really some of the more quantitative jobs, I think. So I gave the example when I was talking to somebody earlier about, for my current job, is a lot of economic research. The interview for it usually involves a lot of kind of basic macroeconomic questions. They want to make sure basically that somebody did not say that they had an economics degree on their resume and make it through the process somehow without ever having taken an economics class. So they're going to ask you something like about the relationship between with kind of maybe like how central bankers choose to manage interest rates in a recession. Very appropriate right now. And so it would be very like subject matter specific. And that's another one that even if you took all those classes, maybe you want to practice a couple of times, because maybe a semester or so out from some of those classes, you might have forgotten what exactly all you learned. So brush up on all those things. Talk to your Career Center, though. They're going to be able to tell you exactly what it is that you need to prepare for. Let's see. I think that was everything I had to say. Just to recap quickly, go to your Career Center early and often. They will help you find different types of industries, prepare your resume and cover letters, and make connections with companies that they already have connections with. And then if that option is not alluring to you, then go ahead and reach out to your alumni networks, the research centers on campus, and your own personal networks through your clubs and family and friends, and start building your own way. Okay, did I miss anything?
I think so. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye, good luck.
Okay, thanks. Hang on just a second.